Hello, everyone. We're going to continue our discussion of the human nervous system today by talking about the human brain, that incredible computer that you have sitting up in your skull. It's an amazing thing. We're going to start talking about it by talking about what's covering it. Everything has a covering in your body, and it's protected. The coverings of your brain and spinal cord are collectively called the meninges. And of course, if the meninges get infected, that's a disease called meningitis. It can be very serious. The meninges consist of three layers. The top layer is that dark line you see there where it says meninges. I'll point it out here. Here's meninges, and here's the dark line. And that dark line is called a dura mater. Dura for durable or tough, and mater for mother. So it's, in English, that technically it just means that your brain is covered by a tough mother. It's mostly connective tissue, and it's there to protect your brain. Underneath that is a second layer, which is illustrated by the dotted lines here. That's called the arachnoid layer. Arachna means spider, so it kind of looks like a spider web. And between all those filaments in there, there's a fluid that actually flows through that and around your brain, and then within your brain, and around and within your spinal cord as well. And that fluid is called cerebrospinal fluid, and it keeps your brain clean, and it has other functions too, which we'll talk about. That's flowing through your arachnoid layer around your brain, the little spiderwebby-like layer. Underneath that is a very, very delicate layer of mostly epithelium tissue called pia mater. Pia means delicate, and it means a delicate mother that's actually in contact with your brain itself. So that's the meninges, and it goes around the brain and the spinal cord. Underneath that is a portion of your brain called the cerebrum. Now, this is going to be your forebrain, part of your forebrain. If you look at the circles I'm going to make here, there are sections here which are part of your forebrain. Forebrain means basically the part of the brain that's kind of on the front and top. The cerebrum is a major, major part of that. And also what's part of that is this white area here called the limbic system, which we'll talk about as part of your emotional responses. You have a corpus callosum here, which connects your right and left side of your brain. And you have your thalamus and your hypothalamus, and your pituitary gland, and your mammillary body. All of those are part of the forebrain. And we're going to talk about each one of those separately now. First one I want to talk about with you is your cerebrum. Now, what we're going to do is look at the next slide here and get a good look at the cerebrum. Your cerebrum is all folded up, as you see. The sulci, these are these depressions in there, these little grooves, I guess. And then the bumps around them, those are called the gyri, G-Y-R-I. The brain is all folded up, and it has to do with increasing the surface area of your brain, so it actually has more nerve cells and works even more efficiently than if it wasn't folded. And if you look at the cerebrum, you see that there's what they call lobes. There's a frontal lobe here, this area here. I'll point it out with my little finger here. This is your frontal lobe, and your frontal lobe has a lot of very, very important jobs. That's where you do your thinking, your problem solving, your control of your muscles and movements of your body. The sense of smell is in there. The voluntary movement, speech is in there. I'm using it right now to talk to you. This is basically what controls your thinking and your basic everyday appreciation of the world and what you do what you do with it. You also make decisions there. You look to the future. You do all those important, very serious, very special things that the brain can do. And then behind the frontal lobe, there is something called the parietal lobe. And of course, they're calling these because they're under the same bones that have the same names. There's a thick here, a thick groove that separates this frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. And the parietal lobe is right here, and that's called the central sulcus, or the central groove. And then the parietal lobe you have a lot of your sensory control here. This way you feel things, and I don't mean feel things in terms of emotions. I mean actually feel them. So we're talking about things like sensation, feeling of pain and heat and cold, touch, pressure, those kinds of things that your body picks up and sends it to this area of your brain for interpretation. Interestingly enough, right here in this area where I'm pointing out, that's where most of that sensory stuff goes, so you can figure it out. And then right next to it, this motor area here in the frontal lobe, that sends messages to your body to deal with all those feelings. So you have these two things right next to each other here. You get the information up about pain or touch or tickling or whatever it is, and then your response occurs right next to it, and it sends messages down to your body to deal with whatever it is that you're feeling. And that's your motor cortex. So your motor cortex is here, and your sensory cortex is right here. The motor cortex, which helps move your muscles and control them and react to sensations, is in the back here of your frontal lobe, and in the front of the parietal lobe, sensory cortex that picks up those senses. The parietal lobe is also involved in there's some language going on in there too, where you actually interpret some of the words that you hear and the ones that you wish to understand. And then behind that is your occipital lobe. That's this one here in the back. The occipital lobe has one big giant job, and its job is to interpret what you see. Vision is very, very complex and takes lots and lots of power. And so to understand what your two eyes are seeing and focusing on and understanding and everything. And so that is your occipital lobe. It's in the back. That's where you interpret your vision. The temporal lobe, this one here in the side, that one right here has to do with hearing. That's the one that you use for, being able to hear or actually understand what you're hearing and making it get into your brain so you can understand it. It's also speech recognition. That's the portion of your brain that's understanding what I'm saying right now. Lots of memories in there too, and your sense of taste is found inside here in your temporal lobe. So those are the lobes of your cerebrum. So your cerebrum has lots of very, very important jobs to do. The next part of your brain, if we go down, back to the first slide, down here underneath the cerebrum here is this white area. That white area is sort of your inner forebrain as opposed to your outer forebrain. And your inner forebrain is mostly involuntary. And that consists of this white area and these other structures underneath it. The white area collectively is called your limbic system, and that is part of your brain that has to do with your emotions. So you have and a lot of your memory as well. So your limbic system control is part of your part of your limbic system is the hippocampus, which is this white area here, the amygdala, which is right here at the end of it, and all of those parts of your brain are connected to your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, so you could have a flight or fight emotional control. Your limbic system is also involved in your emotions, your memory. That's where you feel your emotions. It's where you feel anger, especially in your amygdala. You feel love. You actually feel love in your brain, not in your heart. I know we like to think of your heart as where you give Valentine's Day, but you should actually give cards that have a picture of your brain on it. That's your limbic system. It's all about your emotions. And some memories in there too. Your hippocampus here, this portion, this white portion in here, that is all about memory. And then you get down here into the thalamus, which is this portion down in here, this little ball. What the thalamus does is it's a sort of a relay center, except for smell. All your other senses, things like sight and hearing and taste and touch, they come into your body through your nervous system up to your brain, and your thalamus gets them. And when your thalamus gets the information, it decides where to send it. So if it's getting information from your eyes, which would be over here somewhere, it would get to here and then send it back here to your occipital lobe where you interpret vision. If it's from your ears, it would go to the temporal lobe so you can interpret what you're hearing. And other parts of your brain have to do with the senses of touch and and uh, and and smell. Well, actually, smell is not true. When you have your nose down in here, your nose is close to the cerebrum here, that you don't have to go to the thalamus. It goes directly to this area in the frontal lobe where you actually interpret your smell. Um, but your taste and your hearing and your sight and all of those things, they go to the portions of your brain based on where the thalamus sends it. If your thalamus makes a mistake, you will actually see things that aren't there. Hear things that aren't there, or you'll see music instead of hear it. All kinds of strange things can happen if your thalamus sends messages to the wrong parts of your brain for interpretation. So think of your thalamus as a relay center. The information gets in, and then the thalamus decides what portion of your brain to send it to, so except for smell, so that your brain can interpret what it's all about. And then underneath that, you have your hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus has to do with regulating your body temperature, makes you feel hungry, makes you feel full after you eat. It has to do with sex arousal, thirst, and even how much urine you make every day. And also controls a lot of your smooth muscle controls. Remember, smooth muscle is involuntary muscle that is in your organs to help your intestines work and your stomach work and all those things like your uterus and your bladder and all of those smooth muscle involuntary things you have. And that's going to be controlled by this little teeny bit here called the hypothalamus. Hypo means under, and so it's under the thalamus here. And below the hypothalamus, you have the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland we'll talk about later on. We have a whole section on endocrine glands. But for now, we'll just say that it makes a good number of hormones that control just about everything in your body. It's a small little gland, but it's very, very powerful. And we'll talk about that when we get to the endocrine glands later on. Right? So the forebrain then, what did we just say? The forebrain is your cerebrum made of those lobes. Then you have your limbic system for emotions and memory. You have the corpus callosum. Now, this is the part that connects your right brain with your left brain. You can't see it in this diagram because you're looking at it from the side. But if you looked at it from the front, you would see that, in a sense, it looks like you have two brains. You have one on one side and a big, giant depression, almost like a canyon, and then another one on the other side, a right brain and a left brain. The corpus callosum here just connects the two so that the right brain and the left brain can communicate with each other. Some people say, and I don't know if it's true, that if you're a right brain person, you're more artistic and you appreciate things like art and music more, and if you're a left brain person, you're more scientific and math oriented. But I think that's not exactly true. That's very fluid. The corpus callosum can mix those two together and link the right and left brain together. And then we have the midbrain. Now the midbrain is right in here, this area. And what it's doing is just basically connecting the hindbrain stuff that's down in here with the higher level forebrain stuff here. It also has to do, and interestingly enough, with the way you move your eyes. The midbrain right in here, this area, is controlling has a lot to control your eye movements, and also connects your forebrain with your hindbrain, like I said, and also controls your pupil size. If you go into a dark theater, your pupils get bigger on your eyes to let in more light. If you go into a bright area right after you've been in a very bright, if you go into a dark area right after you've been into a bright area, you can't see very well because your pupils are very small because you were in bright light. But when you get into a dark area, they have to open up to let in more light. And so at first you can't see very well, but then after a while you can. That's controlled by the midbrain. And then finally, you have the hindbrain. Now, the hindbrain is your cerebellum, this area here, and your medulla, this part, medulla oblongata. And then you have your pons, which is this little bumpy area right there. Okay. Let's start with the pons now. The pond's major job is to control your breathing rate. It also helps in swallowing. When you put food down near the back of your throat, there's a series of cells that are touched by the food or the drink, and that sends messages here to the pons and the medulla, and that makes you swallow. You cannot swallow unless you have something to swallow. If you try to swallow 5, 6 times in a row without anything in your mouth, you will not be able to after like the fourth or fifth swallow, because your brain realizes there's nothing there. However, if you're drinking a glass of water or something, you can swallow it over and over again as long as those cells are touched in the back of your throat, and that sends a message here to your pons so that you can swallow, and the medulla too. Okay, so that's the pons. Basically, it's the major thing the pons does is control your breathing rate, how fast you breathe. Um, and then the medulla down here at the bottom, that's a lot with reflexes. When you see something coming at you, you move your head really right away before you even realize why you did it. That's a reflex. It's controlled by your medulla. You have your coughing and sneezing, vomiting. Your blood pressure is controlled by your medulla, and your heartbeat. So you can see this portion of your brain here, the medulla and the pons, that is basically controlling all that sort of basic living things that you have to do. You control your heartbeat, control your breathing rate. All animals have to do that, and control your blood pressure, etc. Behind all of that, right in here, you got this. It almost looks like another brain, and that's your cerebellum. And what your cerebellum does is it controls your balance and what they call your motor memory. If you repeat motor movements over and over again, like learning to walk or learning to run, that information will be stored in your cerebrum, what muscles that you use for those. So you don't have to think about it up here it's stored in your cerebellum. You don't have to think about it up here in your cerebrum. It's automatic now. It's almost like there's a computer program in here for walking and a computer program for jumping and running and all of those things that you do kind of automatically. The first time you tried, though, of course, you couldn't do that very well because you had to think about it and control your muscles voluntarily. But once you do it over and over and over again, you build that program in your cerebellum here. And a good example of that is if you play the piano. You know, the first time you ever tried it, you probably couldn't play very well with one finger even. But if you practice and practice and practice and practice, you can start playing songs without even looking at the keyboard. And that's your cerebellum. It's what they call motor memory. It's remembering the muscles that you have to use to do complex things, so that you don't have to think about it, and it kind of happens automatically for you when you want to do it. That's your cerebellum. It also has to do with balance, so that you can walk straight up and in a straight line, and not fall off your chair, etc. If you drink alcohol affects the cerebellum. That's why you are no longer very well balanced once you're drunk. That's why they say you shouldn't be drinking and driving. Once you got on if you got on a bike the first time, you probably couldn't work it very well. Your father or mother had to hold the seat for you. But after a while, you get that motor memory in there, and you can ride a bike like you wonder why you couldn't do it at first. That's all about your cerebellum. If you're a baseball player, you have motor memory for all if you have to catch a ball as a shortstop, you'd probably catch that ball and throw it to first base before you even knew you caught it. It's automatic. You've done it so many times that it's an automatic response, and it happens very, very quickly for you without thinking. That's your cerebellum. Okay, so that's the major portions of your brain. Okay, you have a forebrain, all this, a midbrain right in here, and a hindbrain in the back. And all of those things have different functions. Now, right here, you have a little guy called a pineal gland or body. And there's some mystery about that, but what we know it does, it makes a hormone called melatonin. And the idea is that it makes you sleepy. So this might be your alarm clock. This is the thing that kind of makes you sleepy at a certain time at night, at the same time every night, and then wakes you up about the same time every morning. And so that's your pineal gland, and it might actually be doing that. That's the one that would be basically messed up if you go to a foreign country and it's like 7 or 8 hours different. And for a while, you don't know when to go to sleep and when to wake up until your pineal gland gets readjusted back to that time zone, and then you'd be okay. All right. Now, a couple of other things. In between, you can't see it here, but right in front here and behind it, you see that little thing here called the stem pellucidum. That's just a little, almost like a little wall, and right in front of that wall, right in here in the front, and behind it on the other side, are two basically spaces in the brain. They're kind of hollow spaces, and they're filled with a fluid. And that fluid is the same fluid that flows through your arachnoid layer of your meninges up here. That's called a cerebrospinal fluid. It's clear, watery-looking fluid, and it flows throughout your brain and your spinal cord. Keeps it clean and osmotically correct, so that the cells don't gain water and lose water. They're bathed with the proper amount of salt. Everything is very controlled here. So you have your cerebrospinal fluid in those ventricles. They call them the right and left ventricles, or first and second ventricles. Then you have some smaller ventricles, and then the fluid flows down through your spinal cord as well. If you get infected with something like Lyme disease, sometimes that actually affects your brain. The bacteria that causes Lyme disease sometimes gets into your cerebrospinal fluid. And when it does, it makes the fluid a little cloudy instead of clear. And what they'll do in the hospital to see if you might have Lyme disease is they'll sit you down and put a needle into your spinal cord. Now, the spinal cord is hollow, and so that fluid actually flows through the spinal cord as well as it does through the brain. And they can suck some of that fluid out. That's called a spinal tap. And they can look at that through a microscope and see if there's certain bacteria in there that causes certain diseases like Lyme disease. Okay, so that's your cerebrospinal fluid. That's flowing through all throughout the arachnoid layers, around the brain and spinal cord, and actually within the center of the spinal cord and in those ventricles or those spaces inside the brain as well. Okay, that's basically the information I want you to know about the brain. If you look at the next slide, you'll see here that it's showing you all the different lobes and what some of the functions are of the cerebrum and cerebellum and brainstem. The brainstem is your medulla and your pons, and the cerebellum and the midbrain. And then you get down to the last one here, and this one here is just showing you that the brain is two halves. It doesn't really cut in like this in this picture. Somebody cut it in half here, but it's connected by that corpus callosum, which is this thing right in here. And you can see here, this is the frontal lobe right in there. That's where you have all your heavy thinking and judgments and ideas, and whether or not you should go to school today or not, or stay in bed, or whatever, or do the homework. And right here is the motor control area of the frontal lobe. That's going to send messages down into your muscles to make you move the way you want to. Which when you decide to move your legs or move your arms or whatever it is, that sends the right messages down to those. The parietal lobe right in here, the second one, that one is has to do with your sensations, and that's where you feel things. And you see this area right here, this section, that's your sensory cortex. This is your motor cortex here and your sensory cortex. When the sensory information comes up to your brain, like what you're feeling, or if it's too hot, or it's too cold, or something's hurting you, or whatever, what you do about it, it's sent over to this side, and then this side decides what to do about it. So you can see how these things are connected. This is your sensory and your motor. Sensory means it receives information from the environment, and motor means let's move something to control it and do something about it. Okay, that is your parietal lobe here. Your parietal lobe also has a lot to do with language as well. Then, and spatial orientation. You look at something, how far away is it? I need to pick up a coffee cup. How far away is it from my body? How fast do I have to move my hand? How heavy is it going to be? All of those things are basically spatial orientations. How far away something is, how close it is. It checks out your environment so you don't walk into walls and things like that. And then here is your occipital lobe back here. And that's the one that controls your visual area. That all this little dotted areas right in the occipital lobe has to do with you understanding what your eyes are seeing. Remember, your eyes don't see anything. They just send a message to your brain, and your brain interprets everything that you see. And that's that back there in the occipital lobe in the back of your brain. Okay. Um, the corpus callosum is this area right in here, this part, and that's connecting the right and left hemispheres of your brain so they can communicate with each other. All right. The thalamus is right under there, and that's the relay center. That's sending messages to the right part of your brain for interpretation so that you don't make a mistake. Some people believe if you take hallucinogenic drugs, it might actually be affecting the thalamus. So when you hear music coming out of a speaker or something, the information will come through your ears to the thalamus, and the thalamus is supposed to send it to the temporal lobe down in here for interpretation of sound. So you'll be able to hear the sound and understand what it's about and everything, and enjoy the music, you know. But what if your thalamus sends it there so you can actually hear it and all, but what if it sends some of it incorrectly back to the visual area? You might actually see the notes coming out of your speaker as rainbow or something. Who knows? You'll be able to misinterpret what you're seeing and hearing. So your thalamus has to do with sending the information to the right area of your brain for interpretation. Okay. So basically, guys, that's it for the brain. And what I'd like you to do is take a look at all you have to do for the brain assignment is to list a certain number of brain parts. I think it's 8, and just describe what they do. And that's all there is. It's a very simple assignment this week, and it's still worth the same amount of credit. So that will be due next Sunday. The one this Sunday is the nervous system one that we did last week. So I hope you have a good week, and we'll see you again next Sunday for a talk about the cardiovascular system. Okay, have a good week, and we'll see you later. Bye now.